Hello, friends. If you love games like Travian, Grepolis, and Ikariam, then you already know how addictive that formula is. Building up your city, managing resources, training armies, joining alliances, and trying to outplay real people over long campaigns, all while wondering if somebody is about to attack you while you sleep. That's exactly what made these games so hard to quit. Today, we're going through 10 alternatives that are worth your time. Let's get into it. Starting off at number 10, we have King of Avalon. This one definitely has some of the same DNA. You build up your city, train troops, join an alliance, and fight over territory with other players. So the basics are there. If you liked the feeling of slowly growing stronger while staying aware of what everyone around you is doing, you'll recognize that right away. But King of Avalon is much more fantasy heavy than Travian. Instead of that grounded old browser war vibe, this one goes all in on dragons, heroes, and a bigger, flashier presentation. So it feels less like classic Travian and more like a modern mobile version of the same core loop. It takes the city building and alliance war formula and dresses it up in a much more dramatic fantasy setting. So if you want something that still has base growth armies and PvP, but you want it to feel bigger and more cinematic, King of Avalon is a decent place to start. At number 9, we've got Arkheim, Realms at War. What makes Arkheim interesting for Travian fans is the alliance side of it. Travian was never just about your own village. A huge part of the fun came from being part of something bigger, coordinating with other players, and getting pulled into wars that were way beyond your own little corner of the map. That's where Arkheim works well. It has that same feeling of realm-based conflict, territorial control, and working with a group instead of only thinking about yourself. The big difference is that it feels more fantasy-driven and more team-focused. It's less about that lonely early game village grind and more about larger scale group conflict. So if your favorite part of Travian was alliance politics, map pressure, and feeling like your faction was part of a bigger war, Arkheim might click with you. At number 8, we have OGame. This is one of those games where, on paper, it doesn't look much like Travian at all. Travian is villages and ancient warfare. OGame is planets, fleets, and space empires. But once you actually get into the rhythm of it, the similarity becomes obvious. You build, you wait, you plan, you grow stronger over time. You watch your surroundings, you join alliances, and you learn very quickly that smart timing matters way more than rushing around. That's why OGame works. It has that same long-term strategy brain. It scratches the part of Travian that was all about efficiency, patience, and constantly thinking a few steps ahead. What makes it stand out, of course, is the setting. If you're tired of medieval-style games but still want that old browser strategy tension, OGame is probably the easiest recommendation on the list. At number 7, we've got Imperia Online. This one feels immediately familiar if you come from Travian. Medieval setting, empire growth, military buildup, alliances, war, diplomacy, all the things you'd expect are here. What I like about Imperia Online is that it really keeps that classic browser strategy spirit alive. It feels like one of those games where every decision matters because everything feeds into the bigger picture. Your economy matters, your military matters, your relations with other players matter. And once wars kick off, it starts to feel a lot like the kind of long-term rivalry Travian players love. So if you want one of the easiest jumps from Travian into another classic strategy game, Imperia Online is a really solid pick. But if Imperia Online feels like the familiar old-school cousin, the next game feels like pure pressure. The kind of game where every bit of progress feels valuable and every nearby player feels like a potential problem. At number 6, we have Tribal Wars 2. Tribal Wars 2 has that same pressure from the very start. You build up a settlement, gather strength, train troops, and constantly feel like the players around you matter. It is not a peaceful city builder. It is a strategy game where every bit of progress feels tied to defense, offense, and surviving in a competitive world. The reason Travian fans tend to like this one is simple. It gets the tension right. That feeling of building something valuable while knowing someone might come for it at any time. That's the good stuff. If you want the closest thing to that original browser war pressure, Tribal Wars 2 is one of the safest picks here. Breaking into the top 5, we have Elvenar. Now, this one is a bit different from Travian, but in a good way. You still get that familiar satisfaction of growing your city, improving production, researching new upgrades, and slowly turning a small settlement into something much bigger. But what really helps Elvenar stand out is the combat. Instead of feeling like another old school strategy game where battles mostly come down to calculations running in the background, Elvenar makes fights feel more tactical with its turn based combat. That gives it a different rhythm. You are still building for the long run, but the battles feel a bit more involved and a bit less automatic. So if you like the progression and city building side of Travian, but you want combat to feel more hands on, Elvenar is a really solid pick. And while Elvenar puts a fantasy twist on the formula, the next game takes that same long term progression and stretches it across entire eras of history. At number 4, we have Forge of Empires. This one is a really easy game to recommend to Travian fans because it still gives you that same satisfying feeling of building from almost nothing and slowly turning your city into something much bigger. You are managing resources, growing your economy, expanding your territory, and always working toward the next big step. So that part feels very familiar right away. What makes Forge of Empires stand out is that it does not keep you stuck in one place or one time period. Instead, your empire keeps moving forward through different ages, which makes progression feel much more exciting. You're not just upgrading buildings for the sake of it, you are actually watching your city evolve, unlock new technologies, and become something more advanced over time. And the combat is a big part of why this one works so well. Unlike some older strategy games where fights can feel like you just send units out and wait for the numbers to decide everything, Forge of Empires uses turn based battles where unit matchups and terrain actually matter. So if you like the long term planning and empire building side of Travian, but you want combat to feel more tactical and a bit more active than pure background calculations, Forge of Empires is a really strong pick. At number 3, we have Heroes of History. Now, this one is where the list starts to feel very different, because Heroes of History is not really trying to be another old school Travian clone. Instead of putting most of the weight on troop counts, timers, and classic war calculations, this game puts a huge focus on heroes and how you use them. And that is really what makes it stand out. In Travian, the spotlight is mostly on your empire, your army, and your alliance. In Heroes of History, your city still matters, but your hero roster matters just as much. You are building teams, using heroes with different strengths, and taking them into real time battles where lineup and positioning actually matter. It also feels more varied than a lot of the older browser strategy games. You have PvE where you go through time travel campaigns, and you also have PvP if you want to test your setup against other players. On top of that, there are alliances too, so it still keeps some of that social strategy feel, but overall it comes across as much more hero driven and much more mode driven than the usual Village War formula. With that said, Heroes of History is a great pick if you want to try something similar, but with a new twist. At number 2, we have Call of Dragons. This is where the list starts to shift from games that remind you of Travian to games that take that same core appeal and make it feel much more active. You still have the things Travian players care about most: building up your city, growing stronger over time, joining an alliance, fighting for territory, and preparing for bigger conflicts. What makes Call of Dragons stand out is how alive the battlefield feels. In older strategy games, a lot of the tension comes from planning, timing, and watching the numbers. Here, the fighting feels more immediate. The map matters more, movement matters more, and battles feel bigger, more visual, and more involved. On top of that, the fantasy setting gives it a very different identity, with heroes, magical armies, and giant creatures making the whole game feel much more dramatic. That said, it is also only fair to mention that, like a lot of modern mobile strategy games, Call of Dragons gets regular pay to win complaints from players, especially when it comes to big spenders pulling ahead faster in competitive play. At the same time, some players still argue that strong alliances, smart play, and good coordination can keep free to play players relevant, so it is not always seen as hopeless for non spenders. So if you like the alliance warfare, expansion, and long-term power building of Travian, but you want something that feels faster, more visual, and much more battle-focused, Call of Dragons is one of the strongest picks on this list, as long as you go in knowing it comes with the usual free-to-play spending frustrations. And if Call of Dragons feels like the fantasy-heavy modern version of the formula, the number one game is probably the cleanest all-around modern successor. And finally, at number one, we have Rise of Kingdoms. If Travian was the classic version of this formula, Rise of Kingdoms feels like one of the strongest modern versions of it. You still have city building, you still have alliances, you still have long term progression, expansion, war, and the constant pressure of dealing with real players. But the big difference is that Rise of Kingdoms makes everything feel more active. Battles happen in real time on the world map, allies can jump in while a fight is already happening, and troop movement is much more flexible. You can redirect armies, pressure different targets, fight over passes, and actually feel like the map itself matters because of rivers, mountains, and choke points. That gives it a much stronger battlefield feel than a lot of the older browser strategy games. It also does a really good job of making your kingdom feel bigger than just one city. You pick from 15 civilizations, each with its own style and perks, build up commanders based on historical figures, scout through fog, deal with barbarians and outposts, and work with your alliance to spread territory and control key parts of the map. The downside is that Rise of Kingdoms is also considered pay to win. Spending money can speed things up too much, and heavy spenders can take over PvP and pull far ahead of everyone else. So if you're looking for the game on this list that best captures that same old obsession while still feeling fresh, Rise of Kingdoms is probably the one to try first. So yeah, nothing is ever going to perfectly replace Travian, Grepolis, or Ikariam. It's just the nature of nostalgia. But if you've been missing that old feeling of building up, joining alliances, planning wars, and slowly becoming a real force on the map, these are some of the best games to check out. Some of them stay very close to that classic browser strategy style, while others take the same core formula and make it feel faster, more modern, and more battle focused. So now I want to hear from you. Which one sparked your curiosity? Let me know in the comments if I missed one that deserves a spot on the list. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more strategy game content.